Knowing how to plan has always been one of the most problematic areas in the game of many chess players. And it's not so much because they don't know how to select a plan or where to choose and play, because that often depends on the side of the board where we have an actual target to attack against, or we have a piece superiority or greater control. So that's easy. So selecting a plan is not that difficult. The real problem is how to manage that plan, really execute the correct moves that can help us go forward with it, and even more so, become more successful as opposed to what our opponent is trying to do on the opposite side of the board. So all these answers are really difficult to comprehend in some way, because it requires patience and the right concepts, the right techniques in order to manage a plan like that. So what I'd like to do in this video is to present to you with the most valuable concepts that you have to keep in mind when planning in the middle game, and most of all, what you should and you should not do when you're managing your plan. The game we're going to see as an example was played between the reigning world chess champion Magnus Carlsen and one of the best Chinese grandmasters named Wang Yu. That was played in the King's Tournament, a top grandmaster tournament in 2010. In this game, Carlsen played with white, and it actually started with e4, e5, and f4. Back at the time when I first saw that game, I was particularly impressed with the opening that Carlsen chose, because King's Gambit is not that common amongst the top grandmasters games, and it's because it's kind of risky, and essentially it's considered a black has good defenses against it. Still, I like that opening a lot, and I think that when Carlsen played it, it was mainly for a surprise, and it worked out quite nicely. So black played d5. Of course, the main idea of this gambit is to provoke black to take away with e5, and then essentially white can get this very gradual and consistent development, which should give him the advantage. So black didn't want to go into these complicated and very highly tactical lines that white was probably prepared for. So he played d5, and after e takes to the d and e takes f, that kind of counter-sacrifice allows black to open the road of his bishop, actually both bishops, and get a fast development, while at the same time the game remains kind of equal. So after knight f3, black played knight f6, bishop c4, knight takes d5, and short castles. Keep in mind that the most valuable planning in the game goes into the middle game. When we start the middle game, this is the moment where we're supposed to think about where we should attack, what are the weak targets, and where we really have to focus our attention. If you're in the opening, you rather think about developing as quickly as possible, and maybe in order to prepare and sort of improve your middle game for later, you can think of developing your pieces at some more advanced positions and threatening squares. Just like that bishop on c4, that's adding some pressure to d5 and possibly f7. When black played bishop e7, white made this very interesting exchange of bishop takes d that some people may consider wrong, because white's giving a bishop for a knight in a rather open position. Yet that gave white a tempo and the possibility after knight c3 and d4 to gain 2 extra moves for a faster development. After black castled, and then white played bishop takes f4, black continued with bishop f5, and then white played with queen e2. Everything so far looks pretty good for white, and ultimately he's intending to complete his development with rook to d1, to actually continue and complete it. He can prepare for rook to e1, and the black bishop pair doesn't really seem as important, as while the bishop is having, the light square bishop has a good diagonal, we can't say the same thing about that dark squared bishop. So after queen e2 and bishop to the d6, white made the exchange, and now we officially start the middle game. Once the rooks get connected, essentially we have that stage of the game which we call the middle game, in which everything that is most important, like attacks, threats, or pressure, is really about to start. Now, the most valuable question in those positions is, how do we start it? What is the first step to get on the right track of planning? And it may sound a little interesting and curious to a certain extent, that I will not recommend you to look at a target. I'm not going to recommend you to find a way to create forcing moves. I'm not going to recommend you to look for any combinations. Most of these are just not going to work, not at least at this stage. As long as the position remains quiet and we've just developed the pieces, our main goal from this position must be to try and gain more improvement, more space, more control. And while we're trying to do so, we're going to prepare for our attack on a later stage. In the early middle game, so to speak, when the pieces were just developed and we are starting the middle game, in the early middle game stage, we should think about nothing else but improving our position and overall the places of our pieces. So Carlsen knew that, and that's why he played knight b5. This move gets the knight to a very valuable advanced position, but also opens the route for the pawn. So when white advances it, he's going to have a little more space in the center, like the d5 square, and he's going to get more freedom, space, and possibilities. That is what I call by improving the position. Find those moves that give you more space, more control, even if they don't attack the opponent. As long as you can find a way to strengthen your overall piece formation and to gain more space and gain more control, that will definitely pay off on a later stage when the combinations and tactics actually occur. So when black played queen d8, well, he could certainly play queen d7, but I suppose he didn't want it because of knight e5, and another square like b6 could eventually be met by queen e5 with a double attack that black certainly didn't want to. He decided to move it down to d8, which was a backward and yet a little bit of a secure move. So white plays c4, a6, and now the knight comes back. Knight d7 and rook d1. Absolutely. There is nothing else to be done. Some people will say, okay, now is the time. Let's play d5. Let's go knight a5, knight g5. No. Those moves are way too fast. They're very committing moves. That's what I like to call them. The committing moves is what you actually want to stay away from. Any type of move that's going to advance a little bit too much, is going to make some early exchanges, it's not to be considered. Remember, what you want are quiet, simple moves with which you can actually gain the right space, the proper control, and piece development. And when you have it, that control, that momentum that you've built, will point you to the right direction of where you want to attack and how to attack there. So, let's think about it. What do we really need? Now we've gotten the space with the d4 and c4 pawns. Knights seem to be close to the center, so actually it looks perfect. And even the rooks, like that rook that's around the middle and the other one on the semi-open file, they're not too bad at all. The only piece that doesn't seem to be doing so much, and it could be attacked by black's rook, seems to be this queen. So sometimes you can't just improve a piece in one move. There comes the maneuvering. Maneuvering of a piece actually means that we figure out a good line for us to move it around and eventually add some pressure and threats against our opponent with it. Just like white's queen moved down to f2 right now, and then we realize that it's going to g3. So eventually it can add some pressure against c7, and that would definitely get great. After queen f2, and rook e8, white made a little square for his king on h2, just in case if we need it. It's called a flight square, or a window for the king. So the back rank cannot be used by black for a checkmate anymore. And also we get to put the pawns in the light squares, which will kind of restrict the opponent's bishop. That is also a light squared one. Rook c8 and rook fe1. White didn't make any attack, and yet his position improved tremendously. That's what you gotta understand. Any kind of tactical play or possibilities you start against your opponent must always begin with the gradual improvement you make in order to get the power, the firepower, and control that you're looking for. When the move of rook fe1 actually came through, white knew that he's ready. Ready for what? Well, we're just about to see. Rook takes e1. Rook takes e1, c6. Black played some passive moves, and for difference than white, he didn't really manage to improve his structure too much. So the question is really, where's white supposed to go next? I mean, white's got lots of space and command, but what to do? Well, you see, this kind of patient improving strategy can often make your opponent to actually lose control and make some bad moves. Just like what happened after c6. The problem with c6 is that this pawn goes up here, and now it's going straight against the possibility of d5. That can allow white to make a to make a strong pass pawn that will counter black, and this is not a good thing. So remember, when you're more patient and you play slowly without actually searching for quick attacks that aren't usually going to work, when you play it like that, the key, and this is actually very important, the key is that you will gain the control and the opportunities to be more successful. Now, when black played with the move of c6, white needs to figure out where to plan. Choosing where to plan is usually not that difficult because you have to look at the features you have. The features in chess are these small kind of advantages that you have to consider in order to pick up which side of the board you have more of them. The features could be more space, good amount of pieces, stronger control, or even a weakness you can attack, a target. So basically we have to think about the king side, which is A, G, and F, the queen side, which is A, B, and C, and the center, the E and D. Right now, we see that the queen side seems completely out of question, as white doesn't have anything special out there. On the king side, we've got the black king and a few pieces around, but he seems to have a good defender, so it's really difficult to arrange an attack out there. And yet the center seems like to be the best area, because white's got more pieces and space there, and definitely the opportunity of making a pass pawn. Considering all these features, Carlsen knew that this is the right area to go for. Now, the second stage of our planning must actually involve the specific moves we look for. Remember to never go with the move that you think is okay. Like to say, oh, this move, I like it, let's go with that. It's connected to the plan, and I definitely want to play it. That's not the right thinking. The right way of thinking is asking yourself, what are my move candidates like in the list? And then decide on which one you want to begin with. And really, that's the right way to go with it. You must always have at least 3 to 4 move candidates in your mind so you can decide which is the best one to start. Obviously, white has rook d1 in here as candidates. He's got d5, he's got queen d4 after d5. And we definitely want to begin with the move that's most straightforward, and essentially, it is the one that can pose pressure and problems against black's position. The move d5 helped white a lot by opening the road for his queen to d4. And it isn't risky. See, those kind of moves that exchange pawns may be a little too committing sometimes, so you have to be careful. But as long as there is no risk in that, I suppose we should do it. If black exchanges with c6 to the d, this pass pawn is really going to be a problem in black's position, as he must always have 1 to 2 pieces to defend it. And further on, when it advances to d6, it will become a very powerful pass pawn, supporting some valuable squares for white's rook and the rest of his pieces. So that's why black played knight f6. When that happened, white continued with queen d4, c takes d5, and knight takes d5. Yes, he took back with the knight. After all, if we take back with the rook, our knight on c3 will do nothing else than protecting the pawn, while blacks will be pressuring it. And so what we would like to do is to make sure we exchange those 2 pieces given their prospects. So knight takes d5 was helpful, and white definitely got the passed pawn. Now, we'll always reach a point in our plan in which we have a strong piece or a good control, like that passed pawn on d5, and we would like to eventually advance from that position. It's great to have a strong pass pawn, good backup like this queen, the rook, and eventually the knight. And yet the most valuable question is how to go from here. What can we do next? The best way to answer that question, nevertheless, is to never hurry. Yeah. Rushing must happen in positions in which you actually see that your opponent has a very strong counterattack or is threatening to do something. As long as your opponent doesn't have any of those, you don't have to hurry. You can take your time and regroup. Regrouping turns out a great aspect of the plan, and it basically means that you want to make sure your pieces make sure that they actually connect between each other, something that we also call as coordination. And when they can actually interact between each other, they can do most threats and they can be most successful. But in order for them to do so, we need to regroup first. And Carlsen does that with the move knight e5. By advancing that knight to e5, he gets ready to prepare for knight c4 and d6, so that actually these 2 pieces, the queen and the knight, can support the pawn. And with that move, he regroups the knight to support the power of the queen and the pawn in connection to the plan. After rook e8, he even regrouped the rook so that it doesn't stand alone, and it's a little more advanced that way. Using the back rank weakness and the fact that black did never make a move of h6 to open a flight square for his king, we do knight c4, given that black can't take here, as after queen takes d, rook takes d, and rook e8, we have a checkmate. So black certainly needs to move the queen, and now, once again, we have to decide. Shall we exchange? No. We are attacking. Remember, if you have the pressure, if you have the control of the position, don't exchange. Keep your control. Don't push it. Don't do anything. Just keep your control and improve it with little moves. The longer you hold your opponent in the bad position, the more there is a bigger chance for him to make a mistake. And that is what White knew in this moment. He knew that he just has to keep Black in the bad position and he's going to crack. So it always happens that way. The longer you keep him in the bad position, the more there is a bigger chance for your opponent to make a mistake. And actually it went. I mean, after the move of rook to e5, Black played h6, which was followed by d6. The strong passed pawn by White is certainly quite devastating. Then he follows it with knight b6 and d7, and that pawn just keeps going. In that position, we could certainly go for queen d6, but Carlsen just didn't want to hurry. Now, we don't want to hurry. There's no counterplay by the opponent, nothing for us to scare. Let's make all these little adjustments to our position, which will be needed sooner or later. And now we've got the time. We don't know if we're going to have that privilege or time later. So let's make those moves when it's necessary. Even the motive, which was the rook that was pinned, is no longer available to Black, as our queen gets protected and our rook can freely move away. a5 supports the knight and keeps its powerful position on d7, so the Black cannot actually take that pawn, given that there is rook d5. Now we see why the queen needs the protection, so Black's bishop will be lost, given that the rook's hanging. And so Black couldn't take that pawn. He played h5, which was followed by h4, and now Black is in a very difficult position. The only thing he can do is just to wait around. He would probably do that, but then I guess he didn't like it, because next move White was going to play rook e3, and if this pawn falls, White has the beautiful knight d5 combination, which wins. If Black's rook takes on d7, we got a fork. If he takes on d7 with the bishop, we have knight f6 check, and after king f8 exchange takes, there is a checkmate. And most interestingly, if Black just doesn't do anything but take the bit, takes the knight, we got the rook e8, so that sort of deflects the bishop, and now if Black takes, we'll promote a new queen and Black will get checkmated. It's beautiful, really. So Black didn't find anything. He was so frustrated of the game so far, so actually decided to take on d7, and then White just took the rook and ended up in a very easily winning position with a rook against bishop, and the queens get exchanged as well. So all that White needs to do really is to move his king forward and win. So he did it quite easily. He can push the Black king back, and yeah, in a little while, White was able to get a strong passed pawn and win because of it. It's not a real question of how White did it. Like after he won the material, it's about how did he get to that point. So the real steps of the successful middle game planning are: number one, after you develop, start by expanding your position, gain more space, improve the positions of your pieces. Number two, after you've done that, pick up the right side of the board. White took quite a while to make all these little adjustments, and then he decided that the best area is the center. Often it will become very clear to you where you're going to play after you have made all these improving moves. It was definitely the center. After White started playing there, he actually considered that the best thing to do would be to regroup. Regrouping helps us to get the coordination, the interaction with our piece in a better way towards the plan, and that helped him to get this very powerful control and support towards the d-pawn. The most important part, however, was the possibility when White played d6 and he didn't hurry. What you got to remember is that you should never hurry. The longer you hold your opponent in the bad position should you achieve an advantage, the better for you. Because first of all, you give him the time to get frustrated enough and make more mistakes, which will help you to win the game easily. And the second is that you wouldn't hurry and risk losing your advantage because of some premature breakthrough or an attack that you really didn't need to do. Hold him as long as possible, and maybe at some point, as if Black played king to g8, rook e3, there would definitely have been a breakthrough. Queen takes to c3, rook takes c3, leads White's rook to c7 or c8, and queen takes h4, and knight d5 is the powerful breakthrough which comes just in time. It's very valuable to see such kind of games and the possibility on how we can win by making all these slow moves that help our plan to stay on track and avoid any risks so that we can provoke our opponent's mistakes first. I hope that this makes sense to you, and you can definitely use some of these little concepts in your next games and the plans you follow.